channel where we question everything. Today's topic is politics. As you have probably heard by now, Angela Merkel, the previous Chancellor of Germany, has provided an interview to the Side magazine, and she made some controversial statements, basically regarding, well, a lot of statements, but in this case, mostly about Ukraine and the Minsk Agreement. Now, if you don't know about this, the whole conflict in Ukraine has started a long time ago, basically before 2014, but it culminated in a coup in 2014 where the democratic elected government was overthrown and then replaced by a American-friendly government. And, well, it's a lot more complicated, but there's a lot of information available if you want to know precisely what happened. But effectively, there were two provinces, or oblasts, as they call it in Ukraine, the Donetsk Oblast and the Lugansk Oblast, that decided they didn't agree with this coup, and they basically rebelled, and they said they're going to not accept the new government. And then, unfortunately, the Ukrainian government decided no, they're not going to tolerate it, and they started a military operation against these two oblasts, which is collectively called the Donbass. And also at the same time, there was a referendum held in Crimea, which was really never part of Ukraine, but that is history. And then they voted to become part of Russia, and it was incorporated into Russian territory. The Donbass, the two republics, also applied for membership or incorporation into Russia, but Putin at that stage refused to do it. So these two oblasts had no other options but to resist, and they resisted military. One must remember that Ukraine was, in the Soviet era, was full of weapons. It was one of the countries with the most Soviet era type of weapon storages. And if you ever hear about weapon smuggling and stuff like that, those weapons usually came out of Ukraine. So they sold a lot of those weapons, but that's something different. In any case, so the Donbass had some weapons, old Soviet era weapons. They also had manufacturing capabilities. And what they also captured during the fighting with the Kiev forces, they also captured a lot of armaments from the regular army as well. And then there were deserters and supporters and so on that brought their armament to with them when they joined the Donbass resistance movement. According to all the information that's available, Russia never provided any military assistance or weapons to Ukraine, to the two Donbasses. Basically, Russia didn't want to get involved in that, and at that stage, Russia was not ready for any conflict. In fact, they were already, they were still importing a lot of food and other necessary items from the West, so they were dependent on the West. The relationship with China wasn't that much developed yet, and military-wise, they were not that developed as well, so they needed time to build up. And at that stage, also, a lot of sanctions were placed against Russia due to Crimea. And therefore, that's why Putin refused to military or to incorporate the two Donbass regions into Russia. And, well, effectively sort of abandoned them, in my opinion, but that's just a personal opinion. If you could do it for Crimea, then surely you could have done it for those two as well. But yeah, Crimea was a logical choice. If anybody thought that Russia would not annex or incorporate Crimea into the Russian Federation, then that person is really naive. I mean, it had the biggest military harbor in the Black Sea, in the warm waters. So it was essential for the Russians to have that military base. And apart from all the other stuff, from ethnicity and all the other stuff that goes, just from a military point of view, Russia would never have let go of Sevastopol. In any case, so I didn't understand why the West was so surprised when Russia incorporated Crimea into there. Did they think anything else? Well, they made the wrong judgment and didn't help. In any case, so the Kiev government army launched military operations against the Donbass. And for some other reason, the Donbass was militarily more determined. And at the end of the day, they were victorious and they drove away the government forces. Basically, the government force had to retreat. They had a military defeat, if you want to call it. And before it could escalate and so on, in order to create peace, there was the Minsk Agreement in 2014, the first Minsk Agreement. And then there were certain rules and certain stuff agreed on, things that should happen, but it didn't happen. And then in 2015, there was another military operation by the Kiev government. And again, they lost against the Donbass military. And in order again to prevent escalation, Russia and Germany and France made the Minsk Agreement too. If those things didn't happen, then the Donbass would basically progress into the rest of Ukraine and could have even overtaken, with the support of additional areas that they would liberate, they could have taken over Ukraine. And that would have been a real civil war, and nobody really wanted that. Therefore, everybody tried to adhere to the Minsk Agreement too. And in this Minsk Agreement, there were 3 or so critical items that the Kiev government should have done. They should have held, again, I think, elections. They should have recognized the 2 Donbass as independent oblasts and give them more autonomy and withdraw weapons, heavy weapons from the front line. And I'm not going to go into the details of that. In any case, well, nothing of that happened. And therefore, the Ukrainians started shelling still Donetsk city and so on, and Lugansk, and killed a lot of civilians, people that more or less 14,000 civilians have been killed during the last 8 years. Now, I've been watching these events and so on, and a long time ago, I already asked myself, but why is Russia not acting? Why is nobody really forcing any issues? It is clear that the Ukraine couldn't or wouldn't not support, but not execute, comply. It was clear that the Kiev government is not going to comply with the Minsk agreements. That was clear from the start. And when neither Germany or France put any pressure on the Kiev regime to do it, then it was clear that they supported it. But for some other reason, Putin believed them for 8 years. And I couldn't understand it. And I thought sometimes Putin was naive. One has to remember, Vladimir Putin is not a superman. He's a person just like me and you. He has certain views. He's at the head of Russia, and he's clever, intelligent, older, but he's a human being, and human beings have faults. We all have faults. So it's not that I'm saying that Putin is naive, that I would discredit him and say maybe that's one of his weaknesses. And if you have watched the whole development, even from the special military operation, Putin always tries to avoid conflict as much as possible. He doesn't want to kill civilians. He doesn't carpet bomb anything. He always believed in the good of men. He still, how many times did he call the Americans, Europe, my friends, my partners, even when they were stabbing him in the back? But he still kept on believing the West. For me, that was a sign of naivete. Why? Because I live in the West. I know how their culture was. I've been watching Europe and America for a long time. The Americans are prone to break any agreement ever. They have ever done it. They are prepared to stab even their friends in the back. They will use people like Saddam Hussein until his usefulness has been expended, and then they will turn their back on them and then stab him in the back. And that's what they have done to him. And it's not only, it's just the most pronounced example, but they have done it consistently. So the Americans I will never trust. Doesn't matter even what agreement there is. Now, when it comes to Angela Merkel, she was called the mama, Mama Merkel by the refugees. And, well, she had her faults as well. And didn't agree with much of it, but later on in a rule, if you want to call it, she became very authoritarian, by the way. She pushed through this whole thing about refugees, doesn't concern about the people of Germany itself. She had her own agenda, and that's what she did. But I don't live in Germany, so it's not really my problem. In any case, so what has happened now? She admitted in a private interview that, well, I have to quote it because the wording is quite important. She described the September 2014 Minsk Agreement as an attempt to give Ukraine time. Ukraine used this time to get stronger, as you can see today, Merkel continued. The Ukraine of 2014-2015 is not the Ukraine of today. As you saw the battle for Debaltsevo early in 2015, Putin could easily have overrun them at the time. If I was very much doubt that the NATO countries could have done as much then as they do now to help Ukraine. And the defeat at the Debaltsevo resulted in the second Minsk Protocol being signed in February 2015. And Merkel said that it was clear to all of us that the conflict was frozen and that the problem have not been resolved, but that gave Ukraine valuable time. Hopefully you can listen very carefully to the wording was said, because I'm going to come back then. And then she said she defended the decision to build a Nord Stream 2 pipeline for Russian gas, since refusing to do so would have dangerously worsened the climate with Moscow, given the situation in Ukraine. It just so happened that Germany couldn't get gas anywhere else, she added. If you listen to the whole thing, you would have noticed that this is a lot more than what is being discussed in the pro-Russian commentary. If we focus only on that, you will notice that they only talk about that Merkel admitted that she had no intention of fulfilling or pressurizing Ukraine to fulfill the Minsk Agreement, and that she was buying time for Ukraine to get stronger. That is the message being done. But like I said, if you listen very carefully, there are two additional items that are applicable that she also said. And she said that Putin could easily have overrun them at the time, which is wrong. That is wrong, number one. And it was very much doubt that the NATO countries could have done as much then as they do now to help Ukraine. That's also wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, firstly, military-wise, Russia was still not developed, fully developed, to take on a defensive, offensive alliances like NATO. I've shown you a video before, the map of the world of NATO itself, and it's huge. Now I will make another video about that. In any case, So Russia was not prepared military-wise to confront NATO, number one. Russia was not involved in the fighting in Ukraine. It was only the Donbas militia who were very, very successful. So there was no reason or any capability of Putin to overrun Ukraine or make war as it is doing now in the special military operation. There was a lot of things to prepare before Russia could do what they have been done now. And then also, as far as I understand, and if I remember correctly, Russia was economically wise still dependent on the West. It imported a lot of food and machinery and wasn't developed economically wise to withstand a lot of sanctions. Yes, sanctions were implemented, but Russia still could do. So this is a very important concept that you have to remember and evaluate what Merkel has said. And then she brings you the new caveat. Nord Stream 2 pipeline for Russian gas, since refusing to do so, would have dangerously worsened the climate with Moscow. So if Nord Stream 2 wasn't built, then if Nord Stream 2 wasn't built, then Moscow would become very angry with Germany and the situation would have deteriorated. Is that the sensible assessment? Does it make logic? Is it logical for you? No, it makes no sense. The Germans asked for Nord Stream 2, not Russia. The Germans initiated Nord Stream 2. They wanted it, not Russia. Russia always wanted to sell their products, so naturally they would have agreed. But if the Germans didn't agree, then business is business. You don't want to do it? It's not that Russia has placed any sanctions on any country except for retaliatory sanctions. This is a false statement from Merkel as well. So what do we have now? Oh yeah, so what do we have now? We have now two wrong statements versus a statement that we would like to believe. So how do you evaluate it? Then again, if you are a military analyst and you have to compile a SITREP, then you put very low faith in what Merkel has said. You give it a low probability. So unless you can confirm it now with French people or other intelligent people, then you can put some faith into what she has said. But otherwise, she hasn't said that much because she has lied on two other occasions as well. So I'm not sure. Yes, it sounds valuable. It sounds as it's just the truth. Because why? Because you want to believe it. You want the Germans and NATO to be wrong. In fact, actually, Putin stated in an address here, when he was asked, I'll say again, I'll quote it. Putin said he was surprised and disappointed by former German Chancellor Angela Merkel's confession that the purpose of the Minsk peace agreement was to buy time for Ukraine. However, he added that it justified Moscow's military operation against Kiev. Their point was only to load up Ukraine with weapons and prepare it for hostilities. We see that. Honestly, we may have realized that too late and maybe should have started all this sooner, Putin said. Yes, Putin. That is what you should have done a long time ago. After 3 years, you should have done it. But if you look at other factors, we know you and Russia were not ready to do it. Crimea was a necessity. That was the risk worth the risk. But the Donbas, no, that wasn't the risk. And everybody would understand that Sevastopol was important. So no Nazi response to that would sort of destroy you. So there will be no military action. And then we look at the events of the last 8 years. So time was won by Ukraine. So what happened in these last 8 years? Was Ukraine pumped full of weapons? No. Show me all the Western weapons that were pumped into Ukraine in the last 8 years. Not in the last 10 months. No, not those. Only the weapons pumped into Ukraine in the last 8 years. I can see very little about that. They have enough Soviet-era type of weapons. Did they train them? Yes, they trained them. Why? Because they lost against the militia of the Donbass. And they improved their tactics. How many did they train? I don't know. It's not important. But again, if I give them time, if I give them time to train and I give them weapons, pump them full of weapons, which is being stated now, then surely I would have trained them on the Western weapons, and then we don't have all this other narrative about, oh no, NATO cannot send its modern weapons because the Ukrainians have no training on that. And it's contradictory in the argument. You can say the one thing, but you can't say the other thing. It's not, you can't butter your bread on both sides. It doesn't work like that. Well, it works, but it's a mess. So again, they didn't pump Ukraine full of weapons. They gave them a little bit of training. And actually they made an error in judgment, because now they gave Putin time to build up and strengthen his economy and make it sanction resistant. They gave Putin the time to make improve his relationship with China and build all the pipelines and so on. It gave Putin the chance to develop his military capability and become a force that can take on NATO. That is what happened. Not the other way around. And then there's another thing that bothers me actually about this whole thing, the whole narrative, West and East, pro-Russian, pro-Western, doesn't matter what you say. So the narrative is that Ukraine was supposed to get into NATO, which we know would never have happened, because they were in a military conflict, civil war. But that's not the point. NATO and America, and well, let's call it America, not to Europe that's much, but I don't know, but they're all the same bunch. But let's call it America. Wanted to use NATO as a platform springboard to weaken and contain Russia. That is what they wanted. For 8 years, they have so-called pumped up Ukraine with full of weapons. They have trained Ukrainians in the new NATO doctrines. They knew, they wanted, and they knew they wanted a conflict with Russia. They wanted it. That's everybody says that. And then they forced NATO, forced Russia, by ignoring the security concerns in December last year. Yeah, December, no? It was November. Doesn't matter. And then Putin had no chance, and he had to enter and support, recognize Donbass. There was a conflict already developing on the front lines from the 16th of February by the Ukrainian militia, and increased artillery fire on the Donbass. So they were prepared to go. Ukraine was prepared to enter the Donbass. And Putin responded, put a halt to it, and we had the whole SMO operation. So the West got what they wanted. They wanted Putin to commit to war in Ukraine so they can weaken him. That is what everybody tells us, isn't that? Everybody tells like that. But then the quick question that comes now, the other narrative. The West is running out of weapons to send to Ukraine. The West is only sending their old retired weapons to Ukraine. You know, the surplus stock. They are running now out of ammunition. That is what everybody says. Eh? Okay. So why are they running out of? So you pick a fight with Russia, you force him into a war, and then you're not prepared for that. You don't build up your own military stockpile because you know Ukraine is going to need it. You know that. I mean, come on. Ukraine versus Russia in terms of capability, size, industrial, everything, that's Goliath, or David against Goliath. So you have to support them. That's obvious. In any case, and so why didn't the West build up their military stock. Why are they running out of weapons and ammunition to send Ukraine? Why didn't they train the Ukrainians into NATO and Western type of weapon gear? Long time ago. You had 8 years. They had 8 years to do it. They didn't do it. Well, they didn't have 8 years, maybe 6 years. That doesn't matter. So you pick a fight and you're not ready. Does that make sense? No. Then, by the way, I read this article about the Stinger missiles. So America has given 1,500 Stinger missiles to the Ukrainians. And this is supposed to be a quarter of their stock, a huge amount of their stock. And then it's going to take them 3 years to replace it. And then in this article it says, Stingers have not been produced in the last 15 years. So for 15 years, the US has not built any single Stinger. No one. 15 years. Does that sound for preparation for war? If you think about that, the Stinger is an important weapon for the air defense systems of NATO and America. It's not the Patriot only. Patriot is a long distance, big defense system. You need it for the smaller ones, the cruise missile, and therefore you have Stingers. And you even have the Avenger launchers. Okay, the second tier version is the air-to-air missiles, which is now the NASAMS and so on. But they haven't built any Stingers. Does that make sense to you? No. So there are so many questions around this whole narrative from both sides that it is actually unclear on what's happening. In my opinion, unfortunately, I have to state that Putin, in my opinion, was naive to believe and trust the Western after being so many times disappointed. So many times. It's not the only thing that the West has turned their back on and stabbed Putin in the back. Not the only one. I don't believe that the statement of Angela Merkel was correct. I put it a low probability that is correct, maybe 5%. Because the other stuff that she has said is also not correct. So maybe she just got into the narrative or telling like a story like we all get, and then the narrative takes us away onto the fairyland. Because the other stuff doesn't gel with that. But it's for you to decide. Look at the facts, don't be biased. Sit back, think about what I've said, and then decide for yourself what makes logical sense to you. In any case, that's my story for today. If you want, subscribe to the channel, spread the word, tell your friends, let the channel grow, and you can have nice live debates. In any case, until next time, cheers.